If my stepmother knew who actually owned the debt on her precious company, she would not be snapping her fingers at me to clean a drop of sauce off the table. She thinks I am just the unwanted stepdaughter she can humiliate over Thanksgiving dinner. She has no idea that I am the silent investor holding the note on her $85 million loan, and in exactly 45 days, I am going to foreclose on her entire life. My name is Maya Warren. The snow was falling outside the great, arched windows of the Northlake Crest estate, a perfect cinematic backdrop for the lie we were all living. It was Thanksgiving. The quiet, snow-blanketed streets of Riverton's wealthiest suburb were pristine, each mansion glowing with a warm yellow light that promised family, warmth, and gratitude. Inside this house, however, the air was cold, brittle, and stretched thin over a rot I knew better than anyone. I was seated at the far end of the mahogany dining table, a piece of furniture so long it felt like I was observing the main party from a different zip code. This was my designated spot, the seat of the perpetual guest, the half-family member. My name is Maya Warren, and this was my father's house, but it had never been my home. From my disadvantaged position, I had a perfect view of the performance. At the head of the table, my stepmother, Veronica Sterling, presided. She was in her early 50s, but fought time with the same aggressive precision she used on household germs. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe, gleaming chignon. Not a single strand dared to defy her. Her dress was a severe, expensive-looking cream color, and her pearls were luminous, reflecting the crystal chandelier above us. She was immaculate, polished, and utterly obsessed with the concept of cleanliness. To her, a speck of dust was not just an oversight, it was a moral failing. Beside her, holding court as her jester and chief enabler, was my uncle, Alex Sterling. He was a man perpetually stuck in a state of middle-aged fraternity, all booming laughs and weak, unfunny jokes. He served as Veronica's dedicated audience, the laugh track to her cruelest remarks. His primary role in the Sterling ecosystem was to validate Veronica's dominance, especially when it was directed at me. The entire affair, the 20-pound turkey, the battalion of side dishes, the presence of distant relatives and nervous-looking business acquaintances, was a stage set. It was all designed to project the enduring strength of Sterling Home Solutions. The company, a legacy brand of household cleaning products, was the hollow god this family worshipped. I knew, from the confidential reports delivered to my personal email, that the company was bleeding. It was drowning in debt, choked by mismanagement, and hopelessly outdated. But here, tonight, it was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, a testament to the Sterling name. I watch them all. I am an operations strategist at Northbridge Facilities Group, a major facilities management corporation. My job is to analyze complex systems, identify inefficiencies, and implement structural solutions that save millions. I build teams. I manage logistics chains that span continents. In my professional life, I am respected, I am capable, I am essential. But in this house, I was still the barely tolerated stepchild, the ghost of my mother's failed marriage. The charity case Veronica had been gracious enough to raise after my mother passed and my father, weak-willed and always absent, decided it was easier to let his new wife handle the problem of a grieving daughter. The performance reached its zenith. Veronica lifted her crystal wine glass, the diamond on her hand catching the light and scattering it like shards of ice. The table quieted instantly. "I just want to thank you all for being here," she began, her voice smooth and practiced, the voice of a CEO's wife addressing a charity luncheon. "In times like these, we are reminded of what truly matters. We are reminded of legacy." She paused, sweeping her gaze across the table, her eyes skipping over me as if I were part of the waitstaff. "It is a pressure, you know," she continued, a delicate sigh escaping her lips. "A pressure to preserve what the Sterling family has built over generations. Sterling Home Solutions is more than a company. It is a promise of quality, a promise of purity." I resisted the urge to check my watch. I had heard this speech, in various forms, for 2 decades. And it has been a difficult year, she admitted, striking a note of noble suffering. There are forces, cold, corporate forces, that do not understand tradition, that do not understand what it means to have a name to protect. She was, of course, referring to Horizon Crest Holdings, the anonymous investment firm that held the company's $85 million consolidated debt, the firm that was, in her words, squeezing them dry. Then, she turned her gaze, and I felt the temperature drop. She did not look directly at me, but her words were aimed with surgical precision. But we will endure, because the sterling legacy is strong, and we know, she smiled, a tight, bloodless expression, that real, true assets must remain in the hands of those who share the same bloodline, not with outsiders, not with those who just happen to be, well, living in the house. A few people shifted uncomfortably. My father, seated halfway down the table, studied his mashed potatoes with intense focus. Alex, naturally, let out a short, appreciative chuckle. I felt the old sting, the familiar flush of shame and anger, but this year, something was different. I looked at the deep red wine in my own glass. I swirled it, watching the liquid cling to the crystal. My heart was not hammering. My palms were not sweating. For the first time in my life, my hand was perfectly, utterly steady. The familiar ritual of humiliation played out, but I was no longer an unwilling participant. I was a spectator, watching a show I had already seen, a show whose ending I had already written. A new, cold resolve settled in my chest, solid as steel. The conversation resumed, a low murmur of sympathetic agreement for Veronica's plight, and then it happened, a small, insignificant accident. A cousin I barely knew, reaching for the gravy boat, fumbled. A single, dark brown drop of gravy splashed from the ladle onto the pristine, white Irish linen tablecloth. It landed just to the left of my bread plate. It was tiny, smaller than a dime. In the low light, it was almost invisible. But Veronica saw it. Her eyes, trained by years of hunting imperfections, locked onto the stain. The chatter at the table died. She stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her head turned, slowly, toward me. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. She picked up her empty wine glass, reached across the small space, and placed it directly on top of the tiny stain, the glass base framing the dark spot like a specimen under a microscope. She stared at me. The entire table stared at me. Then, she spoke. 4 words, delivered with a cold, quiet finality that was more violent than any shout. The same 4 words that had defined my childhood in this house. Clean it again. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. It was a command, a humiliation, and a ritual. It was a reminder of my place. And right on cue, Alex Sterling broke the tension. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud braying sound that filled the room. "Well, thank God for that," he boomed, slapping the table. "At least Maya is better at cleaning up than she is at being a good daughter." A smattering of forced, gurgling laughter erupted around the table. People smiled, their eyes filled with pity and discomfort. But no one, not my father, not a single guest, said a word in my defense. They were all complicit, held captive by Veronica's power and the desire for a peaceful Thanksgiving dinner. I looked from the gravy spot, to Veronica's smug face, to Alex's mocking smile. Slowly, I stood up. I picked up my linen napkin from my lap. I leaned over, deliberately, and placed the napkin over the stain. I pressed down, my movements economical and precise. I did not scrub. I did not panic. I simply absorbed the spill. And as I did, the past 7 years spooled out in my mind like a financial report. I saw the stacks of loan documents Veronica and Alex had signed without reading, desperate for a cash infusion from a faceless entity. I saw the quarterly reviews I received from Noah, detailing every foolish expenditure, every mismanaged project. I saw the clauses in the contract, the ones I had drafted myself, that tied every single asset, from the factory machinery to the trademark on their Sparkle Bright dish soap, to the $85 million note, the note that was currently sitting in a trust controlled by me. The table was chattering again, relieved that the uncomfortable moment had passed. They were back to complaining about the economy, about how this vulture fund, Horizon Crest Holdings, was strangling the life out of their family business. I sat back down in my chair at the end of the table. I picked up my wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine was rich, complex, and slightly bitter. This Thanksgiving, I thought to myself, would be the very last time anyone in this room would dare to use the word outsider in my presence. I let Veronica's voice wash over me, the familiar drone about sterling blood and family honor. I felt the vibration in my pocket. I slipped my phone onto my lap. Beneath the cover of the table, the screen glowed. It was a calendar notification, an appointment confirmation for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Meeting Noah Gallagher. Noah, my financial advisor, my co-conspirator, the only other person on earth who knew that Maya Warren, the stepdaughter who wasn't good for anything but cleaning, was the sole beneficiary and unseen hand behind Horizon Crest Holdings. I set my glass down, my face a perfect mask of polite indifference, and listened to my stepmother complain about the woman who owned her. The words echoed. They always echoed. Clean it again. It was not just a command. It was a curse. It was the soundtrack to my adolescence. But one night, nearly 10 years ago, it had become the defining scar. I was 19 years old. The memory is so sharp it still feels cold. I was a freshman at Riverton Community College, living in a kind of limbo, trying to scrape together enough credits to transfer to a real university, somewhere, anywhere, far away. My mother had been gone for many years, and I was still living in my father's house, which meant I was living under Veronica's roof, subject to her laws. Veronica had been careful when I was younger. She was too smart, too image-conscious to be the overtly cruel stepmother of a fairy tale. When I was a child, she never laid a hand on me in a way that would draw attention or leave a mark that needed explaining. But the day I turned 18, the dynamic shifted. I was legally an adult. I was no longer a child to be managed. I was a resource to be exploited, and a target that could no longer effectively tattle. Housework became my rent, my punishment, and her primary tool of control. I was not just a stepdaughter. I was the full-time, unpaid help. While Veronica managed her charities and Alex practiced his golf swing, I was the one scrubbing, dusting, and polishing the vast, sterile surfaces of the Northlake Crest estate. The night it all cracked open was a Tuesday in November. I think rain was lashing against the house, a cold, miserable downpour that seeped into your bones. I had just gotten home from my part-time shift at the campus coffee shop. It was almost 11 o'clock at night. My clothes were damp, my backpack felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and I had a microeconomics midterm at 8 o'clock the next morning. I walked into the kitchen, expecting the house to be dark and silent. Instead, the surgical white overhead lights were blazing. Veronica was standing by the floor-to-ceiling glass-paned doors that led to the patio. She was in her silk dressing gown, and she was holding a high-powered flashlight. "You're late," she said. She did not turn around. "My shift ran over," I mumbled, shrugging the heavy backpack off my shoulders. It hit the tiled floor with a dull thud. "Did you finish the kitchen windows?" I let out a breath, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. "Yes, Veronica. I did them before I left for class this morning. It took 3 hours." She clicked on the flashlight. The bright white beam shot out and hit the glass. She moved it slowly, an inch at a time, like a detective examining a crime scene. The rain streamed down the other side, distorting the light, making her inspection seem even more absurd. "You call this finished?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. She aimed the beam at a spot near the bottom brass hinge. I had to squint to see what she was talking about. It was a faint, almost invisible smudge, a watery streak left by the cleaning solution, hidden by the shadow of the door handle. It was nothing. A sane person would never have seen it. She turned to face me. Her eyes were as cold and bright as the flashlight beam. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of the rain. "Clean it again!" Something inside me, worn thin by years of this, finally snapped. It was the exhaustion, the damp chill, the looming exam, and the sheer, pointless, grinding injustice of it. For the first time in my life, I did not just nod, apologize, and obey. No. The word hung in the sterile air, small and shocking. Veronica's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose in disbelief. "What did you say to me?" "I said no," I repeated. My voice was shaking, but I did not care. "I cleaned those windows all afternoon. I have been at work for 6 hours. I am soaking wet, and I have an exam tomorrow morning. It is just a smudge. It can wait until tomorrow." It was the transition. It was the moment I stopped being her subject and tried to become a person. It was the first act of self-defense I had ever mounted in that house. She hated it. Her face, usually so controlled and smooth, contorted into a mask of pure rage. This was never about a window. It was about control. My refusal was not disobedience. It was a revolution, and she moved instantly to crush it. She moved faster than I could have anticipated. Her hand cracked across my face. The slap was loud, sharp, and stinging, knocking my head to the side. My cheek instantly flamed with heat and shock. But she was not done. Before I could even register the pain, she grabbed the heavy-duty mop that was leaning against the utility closet. She did not use the stringy, wet end. She reversed it, gripping the thick wooden handle. "You insolent, lazy, ungrateful," she hissed, and she swung it. She was not trying to kill me. She was trying to punish, to teach, to put me back in my place. The hard, polished wood of the handle connected with my upper arm as I raised it to defend myself. It thudded again, against my shoulder blade. The pain was dull and deep, a sickening ache that radiated through my side. It was not enough to break bones, but it was enough to leave a mark. It was enough to remind me who was in charge. I stumbled back against the center island, clutching my arm, tears of shock and rage, not pain, welling in my eyes. And that was when I saw him. My uncle, Alex, he was leaning against the kitchen doorway, one ankle crossed casually over the other, holding a glass of scotch. He had clearly been standing there for some time, watching the entire performance. He was smiling, a lazy, amused smirk. He took a sip of his drink, the ice clinking softly in the sudden silence. "Tisk, tisk, Maya," he said, his voice laced with a condescending amusement. "All grown up, attending college, and still can't clean a simple window. What a shame." The pain from the mop handle was nothing compared to that. The humiliation, the absolute, cold-blooded cruelty of their tag team performance. In that single searing moment, I understood. I was not family. I was a prop. I was free labor. I was the designated target for all their shared frustrations. The legal emotional punching bag for two miserable, wealthy adults who wore the sterling name like armor. My father? He was in Singapore, or maybe it was Zurich. He was always somewhere else. His absence was a constant, gaping hole in my life. On the rare occasions he did call, he would hear Veronica's version of the story. "Maya is becoming so difficult, so disrespectful. I try so hard, darling, but she is lazy." His brief visits home were just opportunities for him to lecture me, to tell me to be more grateful to Veronica for taking me in, to stop causing trouble. He never protected me. He never once even asked for my side of the story. Later that night, long after Veronica and Alex had gone to bed, satisfied with the restoration of order, I locked myself in my bathroom. The room was cold, tiled in the same sterile white as the kitchen. I pulled up the sleeve of my shirt and looked in the mirror. A dark, ugly bruise was already blooming on my bicep, a mottled, angry purple and blue. Another was forming on my shoulder, where the handle had struck me squarely. I picked up my old, cheap digital camera. I held it with a steady hand. I aimed it at my arm and the flash illuminated the injury. I took a picture, then another of my shoulder. I did not do it to show anyone. I did not do it to report them. Who would believe me over them? I did it as a promise to myself. This was the receipt. This was the reminder. This was the moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to leave, and that one day I would make them pay. A few days later, I skipped my afternoon biology class. My grandmother, Lydia Hart, my mother's mother, had called me on the cheap pay-as-you-go cell phone I kept hidden in my backpack. She asked to meet me at a small diner downtown, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and watery coffee, the kind of place Veronica would never set foot in. Lydia was a woman made of quiet, unshakable steel. She looked at me over her coffee cup, her eyes missing nothing. She did not ask about the bruise, which I had covered with a long-sleeved shirt, but I knew she saw the change in me, the new, hard set of my jaw. "You are not meant to be their maid, Maya," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Your mother was a lion. Do not let them turn you into a mouse." She reached into her purse and slid a small, cold object across the Formica table. It was a key, a simple, silver safe deposit box key, attached to a tag with nothing but a number on it. "Your mother wanted you to be strong," Lydia said. "This is from her, and from me. Do not use it now. Do not even think about it. But one day, when you are strong enough, when you are ready to build your own table instead of begging for scraps at theirs, you will need it." That was all I needed. The key was a promise. It was an anchor in a future I could not yet see. I spent the next 2 weeks in the community college library, filling out financial aid forms, applying for every student loan and grant I could find. I found a spot in a cheap cinder block dorm room on the edge of campus, shared with 3 other girls. I packed 2 suitcases. That was all. I left everything else. I left the textbooks Veronica had graciously paid for. I left the clothes she had bought me. I left the hollow shell of a childhood. I walked out of the North Lake Crest house one afternoon when no one was home. I left the cleaning rags, the polishing cloths, and the lingering, toxic sound of "clean it again" to echo in those empty, sterile halls. I stopped answering calls from my father's number. I cut off contact. I disappeared from their lives. I remember standing in that tiny, cramped dorm room. The paint was peeling on the walls, and it smelled faintly of stale beer and old carpet. It was the most beautiful place I had ever been. I sat on the lumpy, thin mattress and opened my hand. The small silver key lay in my palm. It felt heavy, weighted with purpose. It was a seed of freedom. I had no idea what it would unlock. I had no idea it was the key to a future that held over $85 million. I just knew it was the beginning, and I knew I would never, ever be weak enough for them to hit again. The years I spent at university were a blur of work and study. I graduated with honors, got the job at Northbridge, and built a life for myself, brick by brick. From the ground up, I was disciplined. I was focused. I was living out of a small, clean apartment in downtown Riverton, and I was, for the first in my life, completely independent. And then, Lydia Hart died. Her death, several years after I had left the North Lake estate, was quiet, a peaceful end after a long, well-lived life. The call came from her lawyer, a man I had never met, requesting my presence for the reading of her will. I arrived at the downtown law office, a high-rise building of glass and steel that felt a world away from the musty, over-decorated rooms of the Sterling mansion. The conference room was quiet, the air thick with the smell of old paper and expensive wood polish. I was surprised to see them, Veronica and Alex. They were sitting on one side of the gleaming mahogany table, looking profoundly uncomfortable and out of place. Veronica, dressed in severe black, was already inspecting the tabletop for smudges. Alex was fidgeting with his phone, his expression bored and impatient. "Maya," Veronica said, her voice a flat, ungracious acknowledgement. "What a sad affair." "Hello, Veronica, Alex." They were there, the lawyer explained politely, As family members of the deceased's primary beneficiary, their presence was a courtesy, not a legal requirement, but I knew exactly why they were there. They smelled money. Veronica, in particular, radiated an aura of smug, misplaced entitlement. She had always viewed my grandmother as an eccentric, slightly senile old woman. She clearly believed that Lydia's estate, whatever it might be, would be mismanaged by me. She was there to position herself, to ensure the Sterling family could help manage whatever little bit my grandmother had left behind, which, in her mind, meant absorbing it. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, a man with a kind, grave face, cleared his throat and began. He read through the usual legal preamble, the words washing over the room. Alex sighed audibly and checked his watch. "And now," Mr. Harrison said, looking up over his glasses, "we come to the primary bequest, all remaining assets, properties, liquid and non-liquid, including the full portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate holdings." He paused, and I felt Veronica lean forward ever so slightly, a predatory stillness coming over her. "Are to be transferred in their entirety to a trust, to be held for the sole benefit of her granddaughter, Ms. Maya Warren." The room was silent. Alex froze, his thumb hovering over his phone. Veronica's back went rigid. Mr. Harrison continued, "The total estimated value of the Ellen Hart Trust, as of the end of the last fiscal quarter, is $85,420,000. I stopped breathing. The number did not compute. 85 million. It was an abstraction, a sound, not a number that could be real. "What?" Veronica's voice was not a whisper. It was a strangled cry. It was ugly, sharp, and stripped of all her practiced polish. "That is impossible. She was a retired schoolteacher." Alex finally spoke, his voice sputtering. $85 million? There has to be a mistake. The old woman must have been senile. This is an outrage." "I assure you, Mr. Sterling, there is no mistake." Mr. Harrison said calmly, "Mrs. Hart was an exceptionally prudent and successful private investor for over 50 years. Her affairs were in perfect order." "This is not fair." Veronica was on her feet now. Her face flushed a blotchy, unattractive red. "Maya, she knows nothing about money. She can't manage this. It will be gone in a year. This money belongs with the family, with people who understand legacy." "Mrs. Hart anticipated this reaction," the lawyer said, his voice turning cold. He pressed a button on a small remote, and a large screen on the wall flickered to life. My grandmother appeared. She was sitting in her own living room, looking directly at the camera. She looked frail, but her eyes were the same steel I remembered. "Hello, all," she said, her voice clear and strong. "If you are seeing this, I am gone, and I am likely being called senile, but I am not." She smiled, a small, dry smile. "My entire estate goes to my granddaughter, Maya. She is the only one I trust to understand its value. She is the only one who has earned it." Then, her gaze seemed to sharpen, to bore right through the screen and pin Veronica to her seat. "Veronica," Lydia said, her voice softening just a fraction, but becoming infinitely heavier. "You have lived in my daughter's house for a very long time. You seem to have forgotten that you, too, were once an outsider. You just happened to marry in. Maya was born into it. Do not ever forget that." The screen went black. Veronica was shaking with a rage so profound it left her speechless. Alex was just staring, his mouth slightly open. I was in shock, not just from the money, but from the force of Lydia's final, protective act. She had reached out from beyond the grave to defend me, one last time. The lawyer handed me a small, sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Lydia. It was short. "My dearest Maya, I told you to wait until you were strong. Now you are. Never beg for a seat at someone else's table. This is your chance to buy the table, the chairs, and the whole damn building. Make your mother proud. Love, Grandma." I held that note, and the number, $85 million, finally began to solidify. It was not just money, it was a weapon. It was a shield. It was the lever I had never had. It was the power to ensure that no one, ever again, could force me to my knees to wipe up a stain they had made. The timing, as it turned out, was fate. While I was learning the extent of my inheritance, Sterling Home Solutions was in a death spiral. I knew from the town gossip and the business pages that they were in trouble. Years of Alex's bad handshake deals, Veronica's insistence on vanity projects, and their collective failure to innovate had left the company a dinosaur, hemorrhaging cash and crushed by debt to multiple creditors. They were weeks, perhaps months, from defaulting and filing for bankruptcy. The day after the will reading, I received a call. "Ms. Warren? My name is Noah Gallagher. Your grandmother was a client of mine for 20 years. She asked me to contact you at the appropriate time. I believe now is that time." We met in a quiet, discreet office that was nothing like Mr. Harrison's. Noah Gallagher was young, sharp, and had the intense, focused eyes of a chess grandmaster. He had managed Lydia's portfolio, growing her quiet investments into a staggering fortune. He was, as Lydia's note had explained, the only man I trust more than myself. He laid out my new financial reality, and then I laid out a problem. "Sterling Home Solutions," I said. "They are failing." Noah nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. They are currently seeking a massive, high-risk loan to consolidate their debts and avoid liquidation. They are finding no takers. The company is over-leveraged and poorly managed. It's a bad investment." "I want to make an investment," I said. Noah leaned back. "You could buy the company outright in the bankruptcy auction. It would be cheap." I thought about that. Walking in as the new owner, firing them, I shook my head. "No, that's too fast. That's too simple. They would paint me as the villain, the ungrateful stepdaughter who stole the family legacy. I have been their victim for 20 years. I will not be their villain now." I looked at him, the plan forming, cold and clear. "You said they're looking for a loan. I have $85 million. I want to be their new creditor." Noah's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then, a slow, professional smile spread across his face. "An anonymous creditor, through a trust. You would not be the owner. You would be the bank. You would hold the note on their entire existence." "I do not want a seat at their table." "Noah," I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "I want to be the one who decides if they even have a table left." And so, Horizon Crest Holdings was born. It was a work of legal art, a Delaware-based holding company, with a series of trusts and shell corporations buffering it, all leading back to one single, anonymous beneficiary: me. Noah would be the public-facing liaison, the voice of the investment board. He made the offer. To Veronica and Alex, it was a miracle. A mysterious, deep-pocketed, strategic investor had seen the potential in the Sterling legacy. Horizon Crest Holdings offered to buy out all their existing, messy debts and consolidate them into one single, manageable loan. The amount? $85 million. The exact amount of my inheritance. The poetry of it was exquisite. The terms, of course, were brutal, but they were too desperate to see it. In exchange for the bailout, Horizon Crest demanded collateral, not just some, all, the factory, the land it sat on, the brand names, the formulas, the patents, the distribution fleet. Alex and Veronica even had to sign personal guarantees, tying their own private assets, including the Northlake Crest House, to the loan. And the final clause? Horizon Crest Holdings would have 2 seats on the board, with full oversight and veto power over any expenditure exceeding $50,000. The signing was held in yet another sterile conference room. I was there. I had asked to be. I sat in a chair at the back of the room, by the coffee station, officially present as Maya Warren, daughter of the founder's son. I was invisible to them. Veronica and Alex were triumphant. They were preening, shaking hands with the lawyers, already talking about a new era for Sterling. They barely looked at the pages they were signing. They just saw the money, the lifeline. As she signed the last page, the one that put her home and her company squarely in my pocket, Veronica laughed. She looked over at Alex, then gestured with her pen toward me, sitting in the corner. "Thank God," she said to the room at large. "Thank God there are still smart investors who believe in the value of a true Sterling family, not like some of these ungrateful children, who don't even share the blood, but think they're entitled to everything." I met Noah's eyes across the room. He remained perfectly stone-faced. I just smiled, a small, private smile that no one saw. I would let her have her Sterling blood. I would let her play the part of the outsider for a little while longer. She could have the name. I would have the company. I watched her sign her life away, and I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as steel, that from that day forward, every dollar she earned, every company car she drove, every drop of wine she drank in my mother's house would be paid for by the ungrateful child she had once beaten for a smudge on a window. 7 years passed. 7 years of 9 to 5, then 5 to 9. I built my career at Northbridge Facilities Group, climbing the ladder from junior analyst to a senior operations strategist. I learned the language of logistics, of supply chains, of leveraging assets and mitigating risks. My world became one of clean data, complex spreadsheets, and the quiet, immense satisfaction of making large, broken systems work efficiently. My apartment was minimalist and clean, not because of an obsession, but because I craved order, an order I defined for myself. And every quarter, like clockwork, a password-protected email would arrive from Noah Gallagher. This was my other job, the one no one knew about. I would pour a glass of wine, open the encrypted folder, and read the board meeting minutes from Sterling Home Solutions. It was like reading a serialized tragicomedy, written by idiots. Every report detailed the ongoing battle between the Sterling family's profound incompetence and the silent, invisible wall of Horizon Crest Holdings, which was, of course, me. My role as their savior had also become one of containment. Veronica and Alex, now flush with cash, or rather, my cash, were bursting with terrible ideas. They were no longer constrained by a lack of funds, only by the tyrannical oversight of their new investors. I read one set of minutes from about 3 years ago. Veronica had proposed a major brand elevation initiative. This, it turned out, meant the acquisition of a $10 million private jet. "It is essential for courting high-level clients," she was quoted as saying. "We need to project the Sterling image. We cannot be expected to fly commercial." I read further down. In the same meeting, the plant's operations budget had been discussed. The primary chemical mixing line, a piece of equipment from the 1990s, was failing inspections. It needed a $2 million upgrade to meet new environmental and safety standards. Veronica had proposed tabling the upgrade to free up capital for the jet's down payment. Noah's official response, on behalf of the Horizon board, was dry and lethal. Horizon Crest declines to approve any capital expenditure on non-core, non-revenue-generating assets. We authorize the immediate and full upgrade of the mixing line, as per the operations report. Veronica, according to the notes, was profoundly disappointed in Horizon's lack of forward-thinking vision. I drank my wine, a small, cold smile on my face, $10 million for a plane, while the factory that paid her bills was one rusted valve away from a chemical spill. She hadn't changed at all. Then there was Alex. His contribution was a revolving door of disastrous personnel ideas. 6 months after that, I reviewed a motion he had put forward. He wanted to fire Gloria Ramos. Gloria, the plant manager, a woman who had started on the bottling line and worked her way up, over 18 years, to running the entire factory. She was the only reason the place still functioned. She knew every machine, every employee, every supplier by name. She was the institutional memory and the operational heart of the company. Alex's reason for her termination? A lack of team spirit. His proposed replacement? A personal friend. a man named Skip, who has a fantastic handicap at the golf club and experience in high-end automotive sales. He had zero experience in chemical manufacturing or plant management. Horizon's veto was immediate. We consider managerial stability and operational expertise to be paramount. Gloria Ramos's employment is to be continued, and her salary reviewed for a cost of living increase, effective immediately. Alex had apparently thrown a tantrum, accusing the board of meddling and not trusting his gut for talent. The most dangerous proposal, however, had come just last year. It was Veronica's grand solution to their narrowing profit margins. She wanted to shut down the Riverton factory completely. She had sourced a manufacturing partner in a developing country with lax labor laws and almost non-existent environmental regulations. It's a simple numbers game, she had argued, according to the transcript. We cut our labor costs by 60%. We eliminate the burden of domestic pensions and health care. It is the only way to stay competitive. She had presented it as a brilliant, modern business strategy. She had not mentioned, of course, that it would mean laying off over 300 local Riverton workers, many of whom had been with the company for decades. It would decimate a part of the local economy. I read that proposal in my quiet, clean apartment, and the old, familiar rage turned to ice in my stomach. She was going to do to 300 families what she had, on a smaller scale, done to me. Declare them worthless, disposable, all for her own convenience and profit. The Horizon veto that time was the longest I had ever composed. I spent hours drafting it with Noah. It was not just a no, it was a lecture. Horizon Crest Holdings believes the Sterling brand's primary asset is its Made in America heritage and its long-standing community ties in Riverton. Offshoring production would permanently damage this brand integrity, creating significant and irreversible consumer backlash. Furthermore, the ethical and PR risks associated with the proposed partner are unacceptable. The motion is denied, permanently. I read those reports, quarter after quarter, year after year, and I lived a strange double life. I would sit in my office at Northbridge, optimizing a shipping route, and in my head, I would be saving 300 jobs at a factory I secretly owned the debt to, a factory run by the people I despised. The bitterness was a sharp, metallic taste. I was protecting the livelihoods of hundreds of people. I was ensuring their pensions were funded, that their factory was safe, but in doing so, I was also protecting Veronica and Alex. I was saving them from themselves. I was the silent, competent manager of their lives, the very thing they had always accused me of not being. And the irony? The suffocating, perfect irony? They hated me for it. They did not, of course, know it was me, but they hated the anonymous bean counters at Horizon Crest, in public, at the country club, at the charity galas Veronica chaired. She spun a narrative of a legacy family being preyed upon by vulture capitalists. They are just bloodsuckers. I overheard her tell a sympathetic group at a city fundraiser I was required to attend for Northbridge. They have no soul. They do not understand that business is about family, about tradition. They just sit in their spreadsheets and look at numbers, strangling us with red tape. And at the few, unavoidable family gatherings I was still obligated to attend, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the dynamic was even more twisted. They still treated me like the help, but now, their resentment had a new flavor. You were so lucky, Maya, Alex would say over dinner, a pitying look on his face. Your grandmother just handed you all that money. You never had to learn the pressure of actually building something, of having a real legacy like the Sterling name. Yes, Veronica would chime in, patting my hand with a cold, dry palm. It's just a shame, all that money. And for what? It must be a burden, dear, having no real family to share it with. They would say this to me, to my face, while living in a house, driving cars, and funding a company, all of which was being paid for by the interest payments on the $85 million loan from my trust. They were, quite literally, living off the scraps from my grandmother's table, and they had the audacity to pity me. I learned to smile. I learned to nod. I learned to say, You are so right. Veronica, it must be very difficult. I perfected a mask of polite, bland indifference. I let them see the poor little rich girl they wanted to see. It was the best cover I could have. Contempt, I learned, is a wonderful shield. For 7 years, I did this. I held the knife, but I also held the sutures. I was protecting the company, the workers, and by extension, the very people who had humiliated and abused me. A question began to form in the back of my mind, a quiet, persistent whisper. It was there when I vetoed the private jet. It was there when I saved Gloria's job. It was there when I stopped the layoffs. How long do I keep protecting them? They were parasites, but they were parasites I was actively keeping alive. I was maintaining the pristine, clean surfaces of their lives, while they continued to generate filth. Did they deserve this protection? Did they deserve the mercy I was showing them? I did not have an answer. The system was in a stable, if hateful, equilibrium. Until last night. I was on a late-night video call with Noah. It was our standard end-of-year review. Everything is stable. Maya, he said, his face illuminated by his monitor. The interest payments are current. Barely. They're scraping by. But they're current. The factory is profitable. Thanks to Gloria. The brand is stable. He paused, pulling up a new file. But we have a deadline. The original loan agreement was for a 7-year term. That term is officially up for renewal in 60 days. He looked at me, his expression neutral, professional. It's your call. As always, we can renew, we can just keep going, sign for another 7 years. Nothing has to change. I stared at his image on my screen. Nothing has to change. I could keep playing this silent, secret game. I could keep holding their lives in my hands, protecting them, despising them, indefinitely. I could continue to be their secret, unpaid, unacknowledged manager. Let me think about it, I said, my voice non-committal. There's no rush. Let's see how the holiday goes. I closed the laptop. The apartment was dark, the city lights of Riverton twinkling below. The question came back, louder this time. How long? Maya, how long do you let them get away with it? I did not have an answer. And then, 24 hours later, I was standing at a mahogany table, a gravy-stained napkin in my hand, listening to Veronica Sterling tell me to clean it again. And just like that, I had my answer. The air in the dining room had grown heavy, thick with the scent of roasted turkey, heavy cream, and the suffocating perfume of self-righteousness. Veronica lowered her wine glass, leaving a faint crimson crescent on her lips. The toast to the Sterling legacy had ended, but her need to perform had not. She set the glass down with a sharp click against the coaster, a sound that signaled a shift in the conversation. It was time for the grievance airing. It was a Thanksgiving tradition as reliable as the stuffing. It is just a shame, Veronica said, her voice pitching into that particular tone of aggrieved nobility she had perfected over the years. It is a shame that we have to fight so hard to keep this family's vision alive. You would think, with a history like ours, we would get some respect. But these modern investors, they are vultures, absolute vultures. She was talking about Horizon Crest Holdings. She was talking about me. I sliced a piece of turkey with surgical precision, keeping my eyes on the plate. Is the board giving you trouble again, Veronica? I asked. My voice was neutral, polite, the perfect octave of a disinterested stepdaughter making conversation. Trouble? Alex scoffed from across the table. He was already on his 3rd glass of Cabernet, and his face was flushed a blotchy pink. They are strangling us. Maya, strangling us. We present them with visionary ideas, ways to expand, ways to compete. And what do? They quote bylaws. They point to risk assessments. It is like trying to run a race with a ball and chain around your ankle. They are soulless, Veronica agreed, nodding at her guests as if seeking a jury's validation. They do not understand family. They look at a spreadsheet and think they know the business. They see a number in a column and think it dictates reality. They have no concept of the human element, of the blood and sweat it takes to build a name like Sterling. I chewed slowly, swallowing the dry turkey. The irony was so rich, it almost choked me. The blood and sweat she spoke of was entirely mine, and Gloria's, and the 300 workers on the factory floor. Veronica's contribution to the human element was usually yelling at the housekeeping staff or choosing which shade of beige to repaint the executive washroom. I heard, I said, wiping the corner of my mouth, that there was a proposal to move manufacturing overseas, to a partner in Southeast Asia. The table went quiet. Alex's fork clattered against his china. He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "Where did you hear that?" "I read the trade papers," I lied smoothly. "People talk. It seemed like a bold move." "It was a brilliant move," Alex insisted, puffing out his chest. "It would have cut our overhead by 60%. We could have dominated the discount market. But Horizon? They vetoed it, said it violated some ethics clause. Can you believe that? Since when do investment bankers have ethics?" "Perhaps," I said, leaning forward slightly. "They were concerned about the quality control, or the brand reputation. If the debt service coverage ratio is already tight, risking a PR scandal might trigger a default, wouldn't it?" Veronica blinked. The terms debt service coverage ratio and default were not part of her usual vocabulary. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "We are nowhere near default," she snapped, waving her hand dismissively. "The company is strong. It is just cash flow constraints, temporary ones. If Horizon would just release the capital for the private transport we requested, we could sign 3 new national accounts by January, but they are too short-sighted." "Private transport," I repeated. "You mean the jet?" "It is a corporate aviation asset," Alex corrected, sounding offended. "You have to spend money to make money. Maya, something you might understand if you worked in high-level business instead of whatever it is you do at that maintenance company." "Facilities management," I corrected him gently. "And we usually find that assets with high depreciation and operating costs, like aviation, are a drain on EBITDA unless you are logging over 400 flight hours a year. Do you log that many?" The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of exposure. I had stepped out of line. I had spoken the language of the enemy. I saw my father look up from his plate, his brow furrowed. He looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger. Veronica's eyes went cold. She realized she was losing control of the narrative. She needed to reassert dominance. She needed to remind everyone, and especially me, of the natural order of things. And then, the universe handed her the weapon. My cousin, a nervous young man named Peter, reached for the gravy boat. His hand shook slightly. A single drop of dark, rich brown gravy fell from the ladle. It struck the pristine white tablecloth just inches from my plate. It was a tiny accident. In any other house, in any other family, someone would have dabbed it with a napkin and laughed. But this was the Sterling house. Veronica froze. Her eyes locked onto the stain. It was as if the drop of gravy was a personal insult, a physical assault on her character. She stared at it. Then she slowly lifted her eyes to mine. The conversation at the table died instantly. The air left the room. She did not speak to Peter. She did not call for the maid. She looked directly at me. "Maya," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. She picked up her wineglass and set it down, deliberately, right next to the stain. "Clean it again." The words hung in the air, vibrating with malice. It was a reenactment. It was a ritual summoning of the past. She was not just asking me to clean a spill. She was dragging 19-year-old Maya back into the room, stripping her of her degree, her career, her dignity, and forcing her to kneel. I looked at her. I saw the smug satisfaction in the set of her jaw. She thought she was putting me in my place. She thought she was reminding me that no matter how many big words I used about EBITDA or depreciation, I was still just the help. Alex let out a bark of laughter. Oh, that brings back memories, he chuckled, looking around the table to ensure everyone got the joke. Do you remember that night, Ronnie? The night of the mop? He turned to the guest on his right, a horrified-looking woman from the country club. Maya here decided she was too good for chores one night. Little teenage rebellion. Started shouting about exams and rights. He took a swig of wine, shaking his head with mock nostalgia. She had to learn a hard lesson about respect that night. Ronnie handled it, didn't you? A little discipline goes a long way. Look at her now, sitting at the table, using big words. See? Tough love works. He laughed again. Veronica smiled, a thin, cruel curving of her lips. My father stared at his mashed potatoes, shrinking into his suit, pretending he was invisible. The guests offered weak, nervous chuckles, unsure of what else to do. They were complicit. Their silence was a lubricant for the machine of humiliation. I sat very still. My hand was resting on the tablecloth, inches from the stain. In that moment, the last 7 years of internal conflict evaporated. The guilt I had felt about holding the debt, the moral ambiguity of being their savior and their executioner simultaneously, it all vanished. It was burned away by the heat of Alex's laugh. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were not just incompetent business owners. They were not just bad parents. They were bad people. They were cruel, petty, and fundamentally broken. They had taken a terrified teenager and beaten her, and now, a decade later, they were serving that trauma as an anecdote over turkey and wine. They had not changed. They would never change. I had been protecting a cancer, hoping it would turn benign. I slowly picked up my linen napkin. The room watched, expecting me to bow my head, to dab the stain, to accept the role. I folded the napkin. I placed it over the spot. I did not wipe it. I just covered it. Then I looked up. I met Veronica's gaze. My eyes were dry. My pulse was steady. I felt a strange, cold clarity, like the air after a blizzard. You are right, Veronica, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. Dirt is a terrible thing. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. But you know, I continued, keeping my voice conversational, almost pleasant. Sometimes, you cannot see the dirt with the naked eye. Sometimes, things look perfect on the surface. The table is set. The clothes are expensive. The speeches are noble. I looked at Alex, then back to Veronica. Sometimes, I said, only the numbers tell us what is truly clean and what is dirty. It was a nonsensical statement to them, a non sequitur, but the tone, the absolute, unwavering authority in my voice, struck a nerve. Veronica's smile faltered. She looked at me with a sudden, sharp flicker of unease, the way an animal reacts when the wind changes direction before a storm. She sensed a threat, even if she could not name it. I don't know what you're talking about, she snapped, picking up her glass again. You are speaking in riddles, just like your mother used to. It is not a riddle, I said softly. It is just accounting. I looked around the table one last time. I looked at my father. He finally looked up. Meeting my eyes, I saw fear in them. He knew, deep down, in the part of him that wasn't a coward. He knew that something had just broken. He knew that the daughter he had sacrificed to keep his wife happy was gone, replaced by something much harder. Well, Alex said, his voice loud and overly boisterous, trying to shatter the tension. Enough of this gloom. Who wants coffee? I think we have some excellent brandy in the study. The guests stood up quickly, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room. Chairs scraped against the hardwood floor. The performance was moving to the second act. I stood up slowly. I did not help clear the table. I did not offer to carry the dishes. That part of my life was dead. I walked into the living room, but I drifted away from the group gathering by the fireplace. I moved to the large bay window that overlooked the front lawn. The snow was still falling, burying the world in white. It looked peaceful. It looked clean. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up my face in the darkness of the corner. There was the notification, a calendar invite from Noah Gallagher. Subject: Loan maturity strategy. Foreclosure proceedings time: 9:00 a.m. Tomorrow. Action required. Confirm. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could hear Veronica's voice behind me, shrill and laughing, retelling a story about how much the catering had cost, complaining about the quality of the wine. I could hear Alex bragging about his golf handicap. They were so loud. They were so confident. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that the world belonged to them because of the name they carried. They believed that blood was the only currency that mattered. I looked at the notification. I thought about the bruise on my arm when I was 19. I thought about the 300 workers Veronica wanted to fire. I thought about the clean it again command that had just echoed in the dining room. If they believed that the legacy only belonged to those with the right blood, then I would accept their premise. I would accept that I was an outsider. And as an outsider, I had no obligation to leave them a roof over their heads. I pressed confirm. The little circle spun for a second, then turned into a green checkmark. It was done. The clock had started. 45 days. That was all they had left. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned back to the room. Veronica caught my eye and raised her eyebrows. A silent challenge. Go ahead, I thought, a cold calm settling over me. Enjoy the brandy. Enjoy the fire. Enjoy the house. If they wanted a world defined by purity, by what was clean and what was dirty, I would give it to them. I would scrub their lives down to the bone. I would bleach their legacy until there was nothing left but the white, empty space where their arrogance used to be. The morning sun hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment was blinding. It was the kind of aggressive, sterile white light that revealed everything. Every speck of dust, every flaw in the paint, every truth you tried to hide in the dark. I stood by the glass, a cup of black coffee in my hand, looking down at the city of Riverton. From the 20th floor, the snow that had looked so picturesque the night before had turned into gray slush on the streets, churned up by tires and boots, on my balcony railing. However, the snow was still untouched, a thick, perfect drift that looked like a line of correction fluid waiting to erase a mistake. I turned from the window and picked up my phone. It was exactly 9:00 in the morning. Noah Gallagher answered on the first ring. He always did. Good morning, Maya. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had been anticipating this conversation since the moment he saw the calendar invite I sent the night before. Good morning, Noah, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, hollow, but entirely steady. I trust you have the paperwork ready for the renewal? I do, Noah replied. I have drafted the extension agreement for another 7-year term. Same interest rate, same collateral structure. It just needs your authorization to be sent over to the Sterling board for signature. They are expecting it by noon. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter. Delete it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched for 3 seconds, heavy with implication. Delete the extension? Noah asked, though he knew the answer. Delete it, I repeated. I do not want to extend. I want to call the note. I heard the sound of a chair shifting, the click of a keyboard. Noah's tone shifted from administrative to advisory. Maya, you understand the mechanics of what you are asking. The loan agreement stipulates that upon maturity, if not renewed, the full principal and accrued interest is due immediately. That is $85 million, plus penalties. I know the number, Noah. Sterling Home Solutions does not have $85 million, Noah said, his voice devoid of emotion but heavy with fact. They do not have $10 million. If we issue a demand for payment in full, they will default within 24 hours. This triggers the acceleration clause. It forces them into Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidation. We will be seizing everything, the factory, the inventory, the brand, the real estate, and because of the personal guarantees Alex and Veronica signed, we will be seizing their personal assets to cover the deficiency. I know, I said again. This is the nuclear option, Noah said quietly. There is no walking this back. Once that letter goes out, the company as they know it is dead. It has been dead for 7 years. Noah, I said, turning back to the window. I have been keeping it on life support. I have been paying the nurses and running the machines, and in exchange for keeping them alive, for keeping a roof over their heads and food on their table, they have treated me with nothing but contempt. I watched a snowplow push a pile of dirty ice to the side of the road below. I gave them 7 years, I continued. 7 years to show a shred of humility. 7 years to treat the workers with respect. 7 years to treat me like a human being. Last night, Veronica told me to clean a spot of gravy off the tablecloth, while Alex laughed about beating me with a mop handle. That was their answer. Noah, they do not want a savior. They want a servant. Understood, Noah said. The professional mask was back firmly in place. I will draft the demand letter, $85 million, payable in full within 45 days, no extensions, no negotiations. There is one more thing, I said. Go on. The anonymity, I said. We are ending it. Maya, Noah warned. If we reveal your identity now, before the seizure is complete, they might try to tie this up in court. They will claim conflict of interest, emotional distress, family vendetta. Let them claim whatever they want, I said. They signed the papers. The law does not care about their feelings. But I want them to know, when you send the demand letter to Alex and Veronica today, I want you to include the full disclosure addendum. I want you to attach the full corporate structure of Horizon Crest Holdings. I want every shell company stripped away in that document until there is only one name left on the page. I gripped the phone tighter. I want them to see my name, Noah. I want them to know exactly who is taking their house. Noah was silent for a moment. I could almost hear him smiling, a grim, shark-like smile. If you want them to know exactly who the bloodsucker is, I will make sure the font is large enough for them to read without their reading glasses. Thank you, Noah. Send it. I hung up. I did not feel happy. I did not feel sad. I felt like a surgeon who had just clamped an artery. The bleeding had stopped. Now came the amputation. The atmosphere at the Sterling estate was likely very different from my apartment. I imagined the heavy curtains were still drawn against the bright snow. I imagined the smell of stale wine and the headache of a hangover lingering in the air. It was just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon when the courier arrived. I was not there, of course, but I knew the scene as clearly as if I were watching it on a security feed. Alex would be the one to answer the door, likely in his expensive silk robe, looking for aspirin. He would see the envelope from the law offices representing Horizon Crest. He would assume it was the renewal. He would probably be annoyed that they sent a courier instead of an email, muttering about bureaucratic nonsense. He would tear it open right there in the hallway, expecting to see a standard 7-year extension agreement that required a quick, careless signature. Instead, he pulled out a single, stiff sheet of cream-colored legal stationery. Notice of default and demand for payment. I imagined the color draining from his face, the blood rushing away from his skin, leaving him gray and old. He would read the first paragraph, his eyes scanning for the words extension or renewal, but finding only immediate payment and $85 million. Veronica. His scream would have echoed through the high ceilings of the foyer. Veronica would have come rushing from the kitchen or the living room, perhaps holding a glass of hair of the dog wine to settle her nerves. She would see Alex standing there, shaking, clutching the paper like it was burning his hands. "What is it?" she would demand, snatching the paper from him. "Did they raise the interest rate? Did those greedy bastards ask for more fees?" "They called it," Alex would whisper, his voice cracking. "They called the note, Ronnie. They want it all. Now. 45 days. "That is ridiculous," Veronica would scoff, her denial a reflex as natural as breathing. "It is a negotiating tactic. They just want to scare us. Call them, tell them we will not be bullied." "Read it," Alex would yell, thrusting the rest of the packet at her. "Look at the appendix. Look at the disclosure." Veronica would look down. She would flip past the terrifying numbers, past the threats of foreclosure, past the list of assets to be seized, her factory, her brand, her car. She would get to the final page, the page titled Beneficiary Disclosure Statement. There, in black ink, stark against the white paper, was the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for 7 years. Sole beneficiary and trustee of Horizon Crest Holdings, Ms. Maya Warren. I imagined the world stopping for her in that second. The glass of wine in her hand would tilt. She would not even feel it slipping. The dark red liquid would spill over the rim, splashing onto the expensive Persian rug in the foyer, creating a stain that she would never, ever scrub out. It was not just fear. It was not just the realization that they were bankrupt. It was the humiliation, the crushing, absolute realization that the outsider, the girl they had mocked, the girl they had treated as a servant, had been their master all along. Every time she had insulted Horizon Crest, she had been insulting me. Every time she had signed a check to the bank, she had been writing it to me. The phone in my apartment rang. I looked at the screen. Veronica Sterling. I let it ring 3 times. I took another sip of my coffee. Then, I swiped green. Hello? My voice was cool, professional. Maya? Veronica's voice was high, breathless, bordering on hysterical. Maya, is this real? We just got a letter. It has your name on it. Hello, Veronica, I said. Yes, I imagine you have received the demand for payment. You? She choked out. It is you? You are Horizon? I am the sole beneficiary of the trust that owns your debt, yes. But why? She sounded like she was hyperventilating. Why would you do this? Why didn't you tell us? In the background, I could hear Alex screaming. He was not screaming words, just a raw, panicked sound of a man watching his life incinerate. 85 million. How do we get 85 million? They are going to take the house. They are going to take the club membership. Maya, please, Veronica said, her voice shifting gears instantly. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a desperate, cloying sweetness that made my stomach turn. Maya, sweetie, listen to me. There has been a mistake. You can't ask for all the money at once. We are family. You know we don't have that kind of cash liquid. You know that. I know exactly what you have, Veronica, I said. I have read your financial statements every quarter for 7 years. I know you spent $10,000 on custom drapes for the guest room last month while the employee pension fund was underfunded. That was necessary maintenance, she cried. Maya, listen, we can talk about this. We can have dinner, just you and me and your father. We can work this out. You are upset about last night, aren't you? It was just a joke. Alex was just joking. We love you. You are my daughter. I am not your daughter, I said. The words were not angry. They were just a statement of fact, like stating the weather. I am your creditor. Maya, don't be like this. She was crying now, or faking it well. Think about your father. Think about the legacy. I am thinking about the legacy, I said. I am thinking that the legacy is currently insolvent and in default. You ungrateful little bitch, Alex's voice roared from the background. He must have grabbed the phone or was shouting right next to it. After everything we did for you, we took you in. We fed you. And this is how you repay us? By stealing our company? I am not stealing it, Alex, I said, my voice dropping a few degrees in temperature. I bought it 7 years ago. You just didn't read the paperwork because you were too busy spending the money. I will sue you, Alex screamed. I will drag you to court. I will... You signed a binding arbitration clause and a waiver of jury trial, I interrupted. And you signed a personal guarantee. If you sue, you will just be spending the last few dollars you have on lawyers who will tell you that you have already lost. Maya, Veronica's voice came back, sobbing now. Please, the house. This is our home. You can't take our home. I looked out at the snow. I remembered the mop handle. I remembered the rain. I remembered the sound of the door locking behind me when I left for the dorm. It is collateral, I said. It is listed on page 42 of the loan agreement. If the company cannot cover the $85 million, the personal assets are liquidated to cover the difference. But where will we go? She whispered. I believe, I said, that is a question for your financial advisor, not your lender. Maya. This conversation is inappropriate, I said, cutting her off. As of this morning, we are in formal foreclosure proceedings. All further communication must be directed to the board of Horizon Crest Holdings or our legal counsel. Do not call my personal number again. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear her screaming my name, a thin, tinny sound leaking from the speaker. I pressed end call. The silence that rushed back into the apartment was profound. It was heavy and absolute. I stood there for a long time, staring at the black screen of my phone. My hand was not shaking. My heart was not racing. I checked my pulse against my neck. It was slow, steady. A moment later, a text message appeared at the top of the screen. From Noah Gallagher. Message. Demand letter delivered. Receipt confirmed. They know. I read the words. They know. The secret was out. The 7-year masquerade was over. I was no longer the ghost in the machine. I was the machine. I walked over to the wall and adjusted the thermostat. The apartment was perfectly temperature controlled, but I felt a sudden need for clarity, for sharpness. I sat down on my white sofa, the phone resting on the cushion beside me. The light in the room seemed to change. It was no longer the warm morning sun. It was a cool, white, surgical light, the kind of light you see in an operating theater right before the scalpel makes the first cut. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. Just for a moment. When I opened them again, I was ready. The surgery had begun, and I was going to remove the rot, no matter how deep it went. The boardroom at the headquarters of Sterling Home Solutions was a testament to everything that was wrong with the company. It was a windowless, airless rectangle located in the administrative wing of the factory complex. The carpet was a faded, industrial gray that had not been changed since the late 90s. The long conference table, once a beautiful piece of oak, was scratched and ringed with the ghosts of 1,000 coffee cups. Overhead, a single fluorescent tube light flickered with a maddening, irregular rhythm, casting a sickly greenish pallor over the faces of the people sitting around the table. It was the perfect setting for an execution. I was not in the room when the meeting began. I was waiting in the small, dusty anteroom next door, listening through the thin walls. I wanted them to start without me. I wanted them to face the reality of their situation before they faced the reality of me. Inside, the atmosphere was toxic. Veronica, Alex, and my father were seated on one side of the table. 2 other non-executive board members, old friends of Alex who served mostly to fill chairs and agree with him, sat nervously at the end. Across from them sat Noah Gallagher. He was alone. He had his briefcase open, a single, thick file placed neatly in front of him. He looked like a shark swimming in a tank of goldfish. I heard Veronica's voice, shrill and defensive, vibrating through the drywall. "This is entrapment," she was saying. "That is what this is. It is legal entrapment. You lured us in 7 years ago with this predatory loan, and now you are springing a trap just because we are having a temporary liquidity crisis. It is not a liquidity crisis, Mrs. Sterling." Noah's voice replied, calm and distinct. "It is insolvency, and the loan terms were quite clear. You have had 84 months to restructure your operations. You failed to do so." "We were blocked," Alex shouted. I heard his fist slam against the table. "Every time we tried to make a move, every time we tried to show some vision, Horizon Crest blocked us. You strangled our innovation. You cannot tie a man's legs and then blame him for not running fast enough." "Let us review that innovation, shall we?" Noah said. I heard the sound of paper being turned. 3 years ago, the board proposed the acquisition of a Gulfstream G4 private aircraft for executive travel. The cost was $10 million, plus an estimated $2 million in annual maintenance and crew fees. At the time, the company's operating margin was less than 3%. It was for business development, Veronica insisted. You cannot court high-end distributors if you arrive in a taxi. At that same time, Noah continued, ignoring her. The main chemical mixing vat in Sector 4 was leaking. The repair cost was $200,000. You proposed delaying the repair to fund the jet deposit. Horizon Crest exercised its veto power to block the jet and mandate the repair. We did not strangle you, Mrs. Sterling. We stopped you from blowing up your own factory. There was a sullen silence. I could imagine Alex pouting, crossing his arms. And let us discuss personnel, Noah went on. 2 years ago, Mr. Sterling, you submitted a motion to terminate Gloria Ramos, the plant manager. She is insubordinate, Alex muttered. She thinks she runs the place. She does run the place, Noah corrected. Her performance metrics are in the top 5% for the industry. You wanted to replace her with a Mr. Skip Henderson. I looked into Mr. Henderson's background. He was a golf pro at your country club with 2 bankruptcies on his personal record. Horizon vetoed that decision. If we had not, this factory would have ceased functioning within 6 months. You don't know that, Alex snapped. Skip is a leader. He has charisma. Charisma does not mix industrial bleach, Noah said dryly. This is all history. Veronica cut in, her voice tight. Why are you bringing this up? We are here to talk about the debt. We are here to talk about an extension. We are willing to pay a penalty. We are willing to renegotiate the rate. But you cannot just demand $85 million overnight. It is unreasonable. It is un-American. The demand is in accordance with the contract you signed, Noah said. There will be no extension. The trust has lost confidence in the current management's ability to turn a profit. We are exercising our right to call the note. Who is this trust? Veronica demanded, her voice rising to a shriek. Who are they? I want to speak to them. I bet they do not even know what you are doing. You are just a lawyer. You are just a middleman. I want to talk to the owner. I want to look him in the eye and tell him that the Sterling family does not bow down to threats. You want to meet the beneficiary? Noah asked. Yes, Alex yelled. Bring him here. Let us see if he has the guts to face us. I checked my watch. It was time. I stood up, smoothed the front of my navy blue suit, and reached for the door handle. The suit was sharp, tailored, and expensive, a far cry from the faded jeans and oversized sweaters I used to wear to hide my bruises. My hair was pulled back in a severe, tight bun. I wore no jewelry, no pearls, no diamonds, just the suit and the silence. I pushed the door open. The hinges did not squeak. I had oiled them myself a year ago during a site inspection, one of the many invisible things I did to keep this place standing. I stepped into the room. The effect was immediate. The air seemed to adhere to me. Veronica turned, her mouth open to continue her tirade, and froze. Alex blinked, his eyes red-rimmed and confused. My father looked up, his face gray and terrified. They looked at me, but they did not see me, not yet. They saw Maya, the stepdaughter, Maya, the inconvenience, Maya, who sat at the end of the table and cleaned up gravy spills. Maya? Veronica said. Her voice was a whisper of confusion, not yet fear. What are you doing here? This is a closed meeting. This is for the board. She looked at me with that familiar mix of annoyance and dismissal, assuming I had perhaps come to apologize for my behavior at dinner, or that I was looking for my father. Get out, Maya, Alex grunted, waving a hand at me without looking me in the eye. We are in the middle of a crisis. We don't have time for your drama today. I did not speak. I did not look at them. I walked past Alex. I walked past my father. I walked past Veronica. I walked to the head of the table, where Noah was sitting. Noah stood up immediately. He stepped back and pulled out the chair next to him. It was the chair usually reserved for the chairman of the board, a position that had technically been vacant since my grandfather died, as neither Alex nor Veronica had ever claimed it officially, fighting over it until they decided to leave it empty. I sat down. I placed my hands on the table, flat and steady. I looked at the scratched oak surface, then slowly lifted my eyes to face them. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. You could hear the ragged breathing of my father. Veronica was staring at me, her eyes darting from me to Noah and back again. Her brain was trying to process the image, trying to fit the square peg of Maya the servant into the round hole of Maya at the head of the table. "Noah," Veronica said, her voice trembling. "Why is she sitting there? Tell her to move." Noah did not look at her. He turned his body slightly toward me, a gesture of total deference. "May I introduce?" Noah said, his voice clear and formal, filling the room. "Ms. Maya Warren, the sole beneficiary of the Lydia Hart Trust and the 100% owner of Horizon Crest Holdings." The words hung in the air like smoke. Veronica's face went slack. It wasn't just shock. It was a system failure. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish thrown onto a dock, gasping for air that wasn't there. Alex dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the table, rolling toward the edge. He stared at me, his eyes bulging. "What? That is a lie. That is impossible." "It is not a lie. Alex," I said. My voice was low, even, and completely devoid of the hesitation they were used to. "It is the paperwork you signed 7 years ago, page 42, subsection C." "You?" Veronica whispered. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "You are Horizon?" "I am," I said. "But you have been—" She struggled for words. "You have been eating at our table. You have been coming to Christmas. You have been listening to us complain about the debt." "Yes," I said. I have listened to you call me a vulture. I have listened to you call me a bloodsucker. I have listened to you tell your friends that I'm ruining the family legacy." I reached out and opened the thick file Noah had placed on the table. I turned the pages slowly, the sound of the crisp paper loud in the quiet room. "You said you wanted to look the owner in the eye," I said, locking my gaze onto hers. "I am looking—" "Veronica, go ahead. Tell me that the Sterling family does not bow down to threats." She shrank back, physically recoiled, for the first time in 20 years. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had inverted. She was small. She was terrified. She was looking at the girl she had slapped, the girl she had forced to scrub floors, and she was realizing that the girl held the axe. This is sick," Alex spat out, finding his voice. "You planned this. You tricked us. You sat there for 7 years and laughed at us." "I did not laugh," I said coldly. "I worked." I pulled a document from the file. October, 4 years ago. The proposal to liquidate the employee pension fund to cover marketing expenses, which were actually bills for your renovation of the Aspen house. I slid the paper across the table. It stopped right in front of Alex. "I vetoed that," I said. "I saved the pensions of 300 people, including the janitor who cleans your office. Alex." I pulled another document. August, 2 years ago, the proposal to switch chemical suppliers to a vendor in New Jersey, a vendor who was charging 20% above market rate, a vendor who, coincidentally, is owned by your brother-in-law. I slid that paper toward Veronica. "I vetoed that," I said. "I saved the company $2 million in unnecessary costs, money you would have stolen." I looked at my father. He was staring at his hands, tears running silently down his face. He knew. He understood the magnitude of what was happening. He understood that his daughter had been the only adult in the room for a very long time. "You asked why I am here," I said, addressing the whole table. "You asked why I interfered. You asked why I did not just give you the money and go away." I stood up again. I leaned forward, placing my weight on my palms. "Because if I had given you the money, this company would have been bankrupt in 6 months," I said. "You call me an outsider. You say I do not share the blood. You say I do not understand the legacy." I pointed to the flickering light above us. I know that this light has been flickering for 3 weeks because you laid off the maintenance supervisor to save $50,000 a year, while you kept your country club membership which costs $60,000. I said, I know that the roof in the warehouse is leaking. I know that the workers on the line have not had a raise in 4 years, while you two have increased your salaries by 15%. I looked at Veronica. Her face was a mask of ruin. Her makeup seemed to be cracking under the pressure of the truth. You told me last night that only numbers tell us what is clean and what is dirty, I said. Here are the numbers. Veronica, $85 million in debt, 0 liquidity, and 7 years of gross negligence. We can fix it, Veronica stammered. Maya, please, now that we know it is you, surely we can work something out. We are family. You wouldn't destroy your own family. I am not destroying anything, I said. I am cleaning it up. You can't do this, Alex shouted, standing up. I will tell everyone. I will tell the press. I will tell them you are a vindictive little... Sit down, Alex, I said. I did not shout. I did not have to. The command was absolute. He sat. He slumped back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. You will not tell the press anything, I said. Because if you do, I will release the full audit of your expenses. I will show them the embezzlement. I will show them the fraud. I will show them exactly how the great Sterling family spends its money. I signaled to Noah. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the foreclosure documents. He slid a stack of heavy legal-sized papers toward them. These are the surrender of assets documents, Noah said. It details the transfer of the factory, the land, the intellectual property, and all personal assets pledged as collateral to Horizon Crest Holdings. You have 45 days to vacate the premises. Vacate? My father whispered. The house too? The house is collateral, Dad, I said, looking at him for the first time. It was signed over 7 years ago. You were there. You signed it. But where will we live? He asked, his voice trembling like a child's. I don't know, I said. But I suggest you start looking for a smaller table. Veronica began to weep. It was a jagged, ugly sound. I raised you, she sobbed. I took you in when you had nowhere to go. I gave you a home. You gave me a roof, I corrected her. And you charged me for it in bruises and humiliation. You made me a servant in my own house. You made me clean until my hands bled. And you told me, over and over, that I was worthless because I wasn't a Sterling. I picked up the file folder. I held it to my chest. You were right, Veronica, I said softly. I am not a Sterling, and thank God for that. I turned to leave. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was shattered. It was the silence of a bomb crater. Maya, Veronica called out as I reached the door. Please, what do you want? What do you want from us? I stopped. I did not turn around. I looked at the wood grain of the door, thinking about the night I left, the night I walked out into the rain with nothing but a suitcase and a key. I want you to know, I said, speaking to the door. You call me a parasite. You say I feed off your legacy, but the truth is, Veronica, I have been feeding you for 7 years. Every bite of food you ate, every dress you wore, every day you pretended to be a queen. I paid for it. I opened the door. And now, I said, I am closing the kitchen. I walked out into the hallway, letting the door click shut behind me. I left them in the flickering green light, sitting at their scratch table, drowning in the debt they had created, finally seeing the face of the person who held the note. 45 days is a strange amount of time. It is long enough to ruin a life, but short enough to feel like a suffocating sprint. In my head, a giant, invisible clock had started ticking the moment I walked out of that boardroom. 45, 44, 43. Each day was not marked by the rising sun, but by the arrival of legal motions and frantic emails. The silence that had defined my relationship with the Sterling family for 7 years was replaced by a cacophony of desperate noise. They were drowning, and like all drowning things, they were flailing, trying to grab onto anything that would keep them afloat, even if it meant dragging me down with them. 10 days into the countdown, Veronica reached out. She did not scream this time. She did not threaten. She sent a text, polite and tentative, asking to meet for coffee. She chose a small, older cafe near the river, a place that smelled of roasted beans and damp wood, far away from the country club crowd she usually courted. I arrived precisely on time. She was already there, sitting in a booth, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea. She looked smaller than I remembered. The aggressive polish was slightly chipped. Her hair was perfect, but her eyes were rimmed with red, and she wore a coat that looked a season old, as if she were already practicing for poverty. "Thank you for coming, Maya," she said, her voice soft, trembling with a curated fragility. I sat down but did not order anything. "You have 35 days. Veronica, I assume you have a payment plan proposal?" She flinched at the number. "Maya, please, can we put the business aside for 1 hour? I just want to talk, mother to daughter." I said nothing. I just looked at her. "I know you are angry," she began, looking down into her tea. "And I know I was strict, but you have to understand the position I was in. I was a second wife. I stepped into a house that was filled with the ghost of your mother. It was so much pressure. Maya, I just wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted your father to be proud of the home we made." She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears that seemed almost genuine. "That night," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The night with the window. I know it seemed harsh, but I was trying to teach you a lesson about excellence, about not cutting corners. I thought, if I pushed you, you would become strong. And look at you. You are strong. You are a brilliant businesswoman. Maybe, in some way, my discipline helped you." It was a masterclass in revisionist history. She was trying to repaint child abuse as rigorous mentorship. She was trying to turn the scar on my psyche into a badge of her successful parenting. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my chest. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the sticky wooden table. "Veronica," I said calmly, "do you genuinely believe that hitting a 19-year-old woman with a mop handle because of a water spot is a form of education?" She blinked, startled by the directness. Emotions were high. It was a different time. "It was 7 years ago," I said. "Not the 19th century. You did not hit me to teach me excellence. You hit me because you were angry, and I was there, and you knew no one would stop you. You hit me because for a moment, you lost control of your perfect world, and you needed to hurt someone to get it back." "I loved your father," she pleaded, shifting tactics. "I did it all for him, to make a good home for him." "You did it for yourself," I said, standing up. "And the only thing you taught me was that I never wanted to be anything like you." I left her there, weeping into her herbal tea, a performance with no audience. 5 days later, it was Alex. He did not choose a cafe. He invited me to the Riverton Heights Golf Club. It was a desperate power play, trying to bring me into his arena, a place where he felt like a king. We met on the terrace overlooking the 18th green. He was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight, a scotch in his hand at 11 in the morning. "Maya, good to see you, kiddo." He tried to clap me on the shoulder, but I stepped out of reach. He laughed, a hollow, booming sound. "Strict business, huh? I respect that. I really do." He gestured to the sprawling green lawn. "Look, I have been talking to some people, some very serious people, friends of mine. They know the Sterling name. They know what we are capable of." He leaned in, his breath smelling of alcohol and mints. "We are putting together a pool, a rescue fund. We are going to buy out the debt. But here's the thing. We need a little time, and we need a discount. If you write off, say, 40% of the principal, I can get you the cash in 6 months. And hey, we will bring you on board. A real partnership. Sterling and Warren. Has a nice ring to it, right?" I looked at him. He was sweating. I knew the reality of his pool. Noah had run the background checks. Alex had called every contact in his phone. He had scraped together, at best, $2 million from a few old drinking buddies who didn't know better. He was trying to buy an $85 million mountain with a handful of pebbles. Alex, I said, cutting through his pitch, the debt is $85 million. It is due in 30 days. There is no discount. There is no partnership. There is only the wire transfer. Come on, Maya. His smile faltered, revealing the panic underneath. Don't be like this. I used to buy you ice cream, remember? When you were little? I remember you laughing while Veronica slapped me, I said. I remember you calling me a servant at Thanksgiving. His face turned an ugly shade of purple. You are enjoying this, aren't you? You little vindictive. I turned and walked away before he could finish the sentence. Then came the call I had dreaded the most. My father. He called me late one evening. His voice was thin and trembling, sounding older than his 60 years. Maya, he said, it's Dad. Hello, Dad. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Veronica is a wreck. Alex is drinking himself to death. The house. Maya, the house. Your mother lived there. We raised you there. I know, I said. We are family, he said, his voice cracking. Blood is thicker than water. Maya, you cannot just throw us out on the street. We made mistakes, yes, but to destroy us? To take everything? It is not right. It is not what your mother would have wanted. I closed my eyes. He had finally played the mother card. Dad, I asked quietly, where were you? What? 7 years ago, I said. When I packed my bags and left. When I was living in a dorm room with no money. When I graduated and you didn't come to the ceremony. When I spent Christmas alone in my apartment. Where were you? I didn't know, he whispered. You knew, I said. You just chose her. You chose the quiet life. You chose not to rock the boat. You let her treat me like a dog because it was easier than defending me. You had 7 years to pick up the phone and ask me how I was. You only called now because the check bounced. Maya, please. I am not destroying you, Dad, I said. I am just finally letting you pay your own bills. I hung up. My hand was shaking. Just a little. It was the only time in the entire 45 days that I felt a crack in the armor. But while the family was imploding, another battle was being fought at the factory. The rumor mill at Sterling Home Solutions was churning. The workers knew the company was in trouble. They had seen the lawyers. They had seen the grim faces of the board. The word on the floor was that Horizon Crest was going to liquidate everything, sell the machines for scrap, bulldoze the building, and sell the land for condos. Panic was setting in. I needed them on my side. I had Noah call Gloria Ramos. Gloria was the heart of that factory. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who wore steel-toed boots and knew the birthday of every employee's child. She had spent 18 years keeping that place running despite the incompetence of the Sterlings. Noah met her in a diner near the highway. He laid it out for her. He told her about the default. He told her about the seizure. The Sterlings are finished, Noah told her. But the factory doesn't have to be. Gloria looked at him with suspicious eyes. And what about the workers? The Sterlings haven't given us a raise in 4 years. But at least we have jobs. Is this new owner just going to strip it for parts? The new owner, Noah said, sliding a document across the table, wants to promote you to Chief Operating Officer. He explained the plan, the sale to Everline Consumer Goods, the clause that guaranteed the factory would stay open, the protection of the pensions. Gloria read the document. She looked up, stunned. Who is doing this? Who is looking out for us? Someone who knows what it is like to be undervalued by that family, Noah said. It was a turning point. Gloria went back to the factory, but she didn't go to Alex or Veronica. She went to the floor supervisors. She held quiet meetings in the break room. She told them that the vulture investor might actually be their only hope. I arranged a secret meeting with the union representatives a week later. We met in the back room of a community center. I walked in, not as the heiress, but as the strategist. I showed them the numbers. I showed them the reckless spending of the Sterlings versus the sustainability plan I had built. I cannot promise you it will be easy, I told them, looking at the faces of men and women whose hands were stained with the chemicals my family sold. But I promise you this. I will not sell this land. I will not close this line. I am taking the company from people who treat it like a piggy bank, and I am giving it to people who will treat it like a business. They asked hard questions. They were angry, but by the end of the night, they nodded. They realized that their loyalty to the Sterling family had been a one-way street for decades. For the first time in my life, I had a family standing behind me, not one of blood, but of shared purpose. The clock ticked down. 10 days left. It was a Tuesday evening. I was in my apartment, reviewing the final foreclosure filings with Noah over the phone. The buzzer rang. I checked the monitor. It was Veronica. She was alone. She wasn't wearing her coat. She looked disheveled, frantic. I buzzed her up. I left the door unlocked and stood by the window, waiting. She burst in. She didn't say hello. She looked around my apartment, her eyes darting wildly, taking in the clean lines, the minimalist furniture, the lack of clutter. "You have to stop this," she said, her voice ragged. "You have to stop it. Maya, I can't sleep. I can't eat. He is useless. He is crying in his study. You are killing us. I am collecting a debt, Veronica." "It is not just debt," she screamed. "It is our lives. It is my home. I decorated that house. I chose every curtain. I chose every paint color. It is me. If you take it, you take me." She began to pace the room, her hands wringing together. She looked like a trapped animal. "You don't understand," she muttered. "You don't understand what it takes to keep things together, to keep things clean, to keep things right." She stopped in front of a wall where I had hung a series of black and white photographs. One of the frames was tilted, just slightly, maybe a quarter of an inch off center. It was barely noticeable. Veronica stared at it. Her hand twitched. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and pushed the frame. She adjusted it until it was perfectly, mathematically straight. Then she turned to me, her eyes wide and haunted. "Doesn't that bother you?" she whispered. "Doesn't it make you sick when things aren't straight? When things aren't clean?" The room went silent. In that small, unconscious gesture, in that terrified question, I saw the truth. I had spent years hating her. I had spent years thinking she was a monster who delighted in cruelty, and she was cruel. She was abusive. But she was also sick. She was a prisoner of her own pathology. The need for control, for cleanliness, for order. It wasn't just a preference. It was a compulsion that had devoured her humanity. She had beaten me not because I was dirty, but because I was a variable she couldn't control. She had destroyed her relationships, her company, and her stepdaughter, all in service of a frantic, impossible need to make the world stop being messy. "No, Veronica," I said softly. "It doesn't bother me. It's just a picture frame." She looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. She looked at the frame again, then at her hands. She looked lost. "I can't leave that house," she whispered. "It is the only place where I know where everything is." "You have to leave," I said. "In 10 days, the locks will be changed." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. She didn't slam the door. She just left. I watched the door close. For a long time, I had wanted to punish her. I had wanted to make her feel the pain she had caused me. But looking at the empty space where she had stood, I realized I didn't want to punish her anymore. I didn't want to fix her. I didn't even hate her. I just pitied her. She was going to lose everything. Not because I was vindictive, but because she was incapable of living in a world that wasn't bent to her will. She had built a prison of perfection, and now she was being evicted from it. I walked out onto the balcony. The night air was cold and sharp. Far in the distance, across the grid of city lights, I could see the faint glow of the industrial district. Somewhere in that cluster of lights was the factory. I leaned against the railing, feeling the bite of the wind on my face. In 10 days, I would own it all. I would sign the papers that would strip the Sterling name from the building. I would hand the keys to Gloria. I would save 300 jobs. And I would send my father and stepmother into a world they were utterly unprepared for. I thought about the workers. I thought about the men and women who stood on the line for 8 hours a day, breathing in chemical fumes to pay their mortgages. They had never hit me. They had never called me names. They had never treated me like dirt. Veronica and Alex believed that family meant protecting your own. No matter how rotten they were, they believed that blood was a license to abuse. I looked at the distant lights of the factory. No, I whispered to the cold air. I would not protect the people who hurt me at the expense of the people who worked for me. The cycle stopped here. I was choosing a new family. I was choosing the people who built the table, not the ones who just expected to sit at it. The countdown continued. 9, 8, 7. I was ready. Day 45 arrived with a sky the color of a wet bruise. Riverton was ugly in the thaw. The snow that had blanketed the city on Thanksgiving, providing a picturesque backdrop for Veronica's performance of domestic perfection, was gone. In its place was a thick, gray slush that clogged the gutters and splashed dirty, freezing water onto the sidewalks. It was a messy, chaotic day, the kind of day where dirt was unavoidable. It was the perfect weather for a funeral or a foreclosure. We were gathered in the conference room of a high-end bankruptcy firm downtown. This room was different from the decaying boardroom at the factory. Here, the air was filtered and silent. The table was glass, cold and sleek. The view from the window showed the gray city below, indifferent to the drama unfolding 40 floors up. On one side of the table sat the Sterling contingent, Veronica, Alex, and my father, flanked by 2 disheveled lawyers they had hired at the last minute. They looked like people who had not slept in a month. Veronica's hair was pulled back, but strands were loose, flying around her face. Her makeup was applied with a heavy hand, trying to cover the dark circles that looked like permanent shadows. Alex was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped a styrofoam cup of coffee. My father just looked small, shrinking into his overcoat as if trying to disappear. Opposite them sat Noah Gallagher and me. Noah opened his briefcase. The sound of the latches clicking was the only noise in the room. He pulled out a single, thick document and placed it in the center of the glass table. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Sterling," Noah began. His voice was devoid of inflection. It was the voice of the inevitable. As of close of business yesterday, the 45-day cure period for the default on the Horizon Crest loan has expired. No payment has been received. No restructuring plan has been accepted. He paused, letting the words settle like dust. Therefore, on behalf of the creditor, Horizon Crest Holdings, we are moving to file an involuntary petition for relief under Chapter 7 of the United States Bankruptcy Code against Sterling Home Solutions. Veronica let out a small, strangled sound. Chapter 7? But that is liquidation. That is the end. Why not Chapter 11? We can reorganize. We can... Chapter 11 requires a creditor who believes the business is viable. Noah interrupted. Horizon Crest does not share that belief. We are not interested in a reorganization. We are interested in asset recovery. The lawyer representing the Sterlings cleared his throat nervously. Now, see here. My clients have significant equity in the brand. To force a liquidation is an aggressive move that destroys value. The value was destroyed 7 years ago, I said. Everyone turned to me. I was sitting perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. The value, I continued, keeping my voice low and even, was destroyed when you stopped maintaining the machinery, when you stopped innovating, when you treated the company accounts as a personal piggy bank. I looked at Noah. He nodded and picked up the list. As the sole secured creditor, Noah read, Horizon Crest will be moving to seize and liquidate all collateral pledged against the loan. This includes the primary manufacturing facility in Riverton, the distribution warehouses in the tri-state area, the entirety of the finished goods inventory, the intellectual property, including the trademarks for Sterling Home Solutions, Sparkle Bright, and all associated chemical formulas. As he read each item, It felt like he was stripping layers of skin off Veronica. The factory was her stage. The brand was her costume. The inventory was her prop. Without them, she was just an aging woman with a mean streak and no audience. Furthermore, Noah said, turning the page, this was the moment. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The corporate assets of Sterling Home Solutions have been appraised. Their current liquidation value is estimated at roughly $60 million. The outstanding debt, with interest and penalties, is $87 million. There is a deficiency of $27 million. Alex looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. So the company goes under. That is business. You write off the loss. Not in this case, Noah said. He pulled out 3 specific documents from the file. They were yellowed with age, signed 7 years ago in a flurry of greed and arrogance. Because of the personal guarantees signed by Alexander Sterling and Veronica Sterling, the deficiency passes to you personally. Noah slid the papers across the glass. Horizon Crest is exercising its right to attach liens to all personal assets listed in the schedule. This includes the residential property known as North Lake Crest, the vacation property in the Finger Lakes, the securities accounts held at First National, and the 3 vehicles registered to the family trust. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a heart stopping. Veronica stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the floor. "No," she whispered. Then she screamed, a raw, jagged sound that cracked the polite atmosphere of the law office. "No, you cannot do this. That is my house. That is my home." She looked at the lawyers, then at Noah, and finally, she turned her desperate, wild eyes to me. "Maya, this is not humane," she cried, tears cutting tracks through her foundation. "You are taking the roof over our heads? You are putting your father on the street? We are family. Family is supposed to be treated differently. You cannot treat your own blood like this." I watched her unravel. I watched the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I did not belong, begging me to remember that we belonged together. "Family?" I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. "Yes," she sobbed. "We are your family. How can you be so cold? How can you sit there and watch us lose everything?" 7 years ago, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "At the dinner table, you told me that the family money belonged in the hands of those with the right blood. You said that people who just happened to live in the house did not deserve a seat at the table." "I didn't mean," she stammered. "You meant every word," I said. "You meant it when you hit me. You meant it when you made me a servant. You meant it every time you looked at me with that sneer you are trying so hard to hide right now." I leaned forward. "The law does not care about blood, Veronica," I said. "The law does not care if we share DNA or if we share a last name. The law only cares about who holds the contract, and you signed the contract." My father made a sound. It was a deep, shuddering sigh. He was sitting with his head in his hands, but now he looked up. He looked at Veronica, who was still screaming about injustice. Then he looked at Alex, who was staring at the wall in catatonic shock. Finally, he looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't just a weak man bullied by a strong wife. He was a man who had made a choice, every single day for 20 years, to prioritize his comfort over his daughter. "It wasn't the money, was it?" my father asked softly. His voice was raspy. The room went quiet. Veronica stopped sobbing to look at him. "All this time," he said, looking at me with eyes that were finally devastatingly awake. "I thought you were angry about the allowance, or the college tuition. I thought if we just ignored you, you would get over it." He shook his head slowly. "I never asked you," he whispered. "In 7 years. I never once asked you how you were doing. I never asked you if you were happy. I just let you leave." "Yes," I said. "You did." "I am sorry," he said. It was the first time he had ever said those words to me. "I accept your apology, Dad," I said, "but I am still foreclosing on the house." He nodded slowly. He understood. The apology fixed the past. Maybe. But it did not pay the debt of the present. "So what happens now?" Alex asked, his voice thick. "You sell it all? You chop it up? You destroy the company just to spite us?" "No," I said. "I am not you. Alex, I do not destroy things because I am angry." I signaled to Noah. He opened the second part of the file. This was the future. "Horizon Crest will be engaging in a credit bid at the auction," I announced. "We will use the debt you owe us to purchase the corporate assets ourselves. We will own the factory, the brand, and the inventory outright." I looked at them, making sure they understood. "And immediately upon closing," I continued, "Horizon Crest will be selling a 70% stake in the new entity to Everline Consumer Goods." "Everline?" Alex blinked. "The conglomerate? They will shut it down. They will move production to Mexico in a heartbeat." "No," I said. "They won't, because I drafted the sale agreement myself." I pulled out the term sheet. It was the document I was most proud of. "I am retaining 30% ownership," I explained, "and a permanent seat on the board, and the contract has specific, unbreakable covenants. The Riverton factory remains open for a minimum of 10 years. The entire workforce is retained at their current seniority levels. Wages are increased by 15% immediately to match the Everline standard." I paused. "And Gloria Ramos is appointed as the new chief operating officer of the division." Veronica stared at me. She looked confused, as if I were speaking a language she couldn't comprehend. "You—" She struggled with the concept. "You are saving the factory? You are saving the workers?" "Yes," I said. "But you are ruining us," she whispered. "I am not ruining you," I said. "I am simply stopping you from ruining everyone else. You were going to fire 300 people. Veronica, you were going to destroy a community so you could buy a jet. I am taking the toy away from the child who breaks it." I stood up. The meeting was effectively over. The lawyers needed to handle the paperwork, the official filing of the motions, but the emotional transaction was complete. "Maya," Veronica said. She moved toward me. She reached out a hand, then pulled it back, realizing she no longer had the right to touch me. "The house," she pleaded. Her voice was small, stripped of all its artifice. "Please, keep the factory, keep the money, but the house. Your mother lived there. There are pencil marks on the doorframe from when you were growing up. It is the place where your mother's memory lives. Don't you want to keep that?" It was her last card, the most manipulative, desperate card in her deck. She was trying to hold my dead mother hostage to save her own lifestyle. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had scrubbed every trace of my mother out of that house the moment she moved in. The woman who had repainted the walls, replaced the furniture, and turned a home into a museum of her own ego. "You are right," I said. "My mother did live there." I looked her dead in the eye. "And then you moved in, and you turned every room into a battlefield. You made that kitchen a place of fear. You made the dining room a place of humiliation. You scrubbed my mother out of that house years ago. Veronica, you made it a place I do not want to remember." I picked up my briefcase. "I am going to take that house," I said, "and I am going to turn it into something else, something useful. I am going to turn it into a place that other people can actually call a home, a place where people are safe, a place where no one screams about stains on a window." "You can't," she sobbed. "I can," I said, "and I will." Noah pushed the final surrender documents across the table. They were heavy, bound in blue legal backing. "Sign," Noah said, "or the marshals will be there in the morning to escort you out." Veronica looked at the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She looked at Alex, who was weeping silently. She looked at my father, who was staring out the window at the gray sky. She bent down and signed. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was loud in the room. It sounded like a nail being driven into wood. It sounded like the final, gasping breath of the Sterling legacy. Alex signed next, then my father. With every signature, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was just relief. The deep, Exhausting relief of putting down a heavy load you have been carrying for half your life. Noah collected the papers. He checked the signatures. He nodded to me. "It is done," he said. I stood there for a moment, looking at them. They were broken. They were finished. They were just 3 people in a room with a lot of debt and nowhere to go. "The auction is next week," I said. "I suggest you start packing. You have a lot of clutter to clear out." I turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back. I stepped out of the office and into the hallway. Walking toward the elevator, I pressed the button for the ground floor. I was going down to the street, into the dirty, gray slush of the real world. I was going to the auction. I was going to buy a company. I was going to save a town. I felt clean. For the first time in 20 years, I felt completely, absolutely clean. The bankruptcy court was a room devoid of soul. It was a place of beige walls, fluorescent lights, and the smell of stale anxiety. It was the place where dreams came to die, dissected by lawyers and sold off in pieces to the highest bidder. On the day of the auction, the room was crowded. The collapse of Sterling Home Solutions had been the talk of the Riverton business community for weeks. The sharks had gathered. There were liquidators who wanted the inventory. There were developers who wanted the land. There were competitors who wanted to buy the trademark just to bury it. I sat in the back row, next to Noah Gallagher. I was wearing the same navy suit I had worn to the board meeting. I felt calm. It was a strange, hollow kind of calm, like the silence after a heavy snowfall. Veronica and Alex were sitting in the front row. They looked like ghosts. Alex was slumped in his chair, his collar unbuttoned, his face a mask of defeat. Veronica sat rigid, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. She stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the people whispering behind her. She was trying to maintain her dignity, but in this room, dignity was not a currency that held any value. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like gravel, began the proceedings. "We are here to auction the assets of Sterling Home Solutions," he announced. "This is a bulk sale. We are selling the manufacturing facility, the distribution centers, the inventory, and all intellectual property as a single lot." The bidding started low. 5 million, 10 million. The developers jumped in, driving the price up. They wanted the land the factory stood on. They saw condos. They saw strip malls. They did not care about the 300 people who worked there. 15 million, 20 million. Alex turned his head slightly. I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. If the price went high enough, if it covered the debt, maybe they would get out of this with just the loss of the company. Maybe they could keep the house. Maybe they could keep their personal lives intact. The price stalled at $35 million. "$35 million, the auctioneer called out. "Going once." Noah stood up. "Horizon Crest Holdings bid $60 million, Noah said clearly. A gasp ran through the room. $60 million was significantly higher than the liquidation value. It was a knockout punch. The developers shook their heads and put down their paddles. The liquidators closed their folders. No one was going to pay that much for a failing chemical plant. "We have a bid of $60 million, the auctioneer said. "Any other bids?" Silence. "Sold," the auctioneer slammed his gavel down. "To Horizon Crest Holdings." Alex let out a long, shuddering breath. He turned to his lawyer, a cheap, frantic man they had hired after their usual counsel dropped them. $60 million, Alex whispered loud enough for me to hear. "That is good, right? That covers a lot of it." I watched the lawyer lean in. I saw his lips move. I saw the blood drain from Alex's face until he looked like a corpse. "Mr. Sterling?" the lawyer explained, his voice hushed but carrying in the quiet room. "The total debt is $85 million. The sale price is $60 million. That leaves a deficiency of $25 million. Alex stared at him. But we don't have $25 million? "I know," the lawyer said. "And because you signed the personal guarantees, Horizon Crest can now move to collect the balance from your private assets. The house, the cars, the investment accounts, it is all gone. Alex, you are still on the hook." Veronica made a sound like a wounded animal. She slumped forward, burying her face in her hands. The hope that had flickered for a brief second was extinguished, leaving them in total darkness. I stood up and walked out of the courtroom. The air outside was crisp. It was early spring, and the gray slush was finally melting, revealing the wet pavement beneath. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. I waited on the wide concrete steps of the courthouse. I knew they would be coming out soon. A few minutes later, the doors opened. Alex walked out first, looking like a man in a trance. He walked past me without seeing me, stumbling toward the parking lot, loosening his tie as if he were choking. Then came Veronica. She was wearing her fur coat, but it looked heavy on her now, like a burden rather than a trophy. She stopped when she saw me. She stood there, shivering in the cool wind. She looked down at the iron railing of the courthouse steps. There was nothing there. It was just cold, gray metal. But she reached out with her gloved hand and brushed it. She rubbed a spot on the rail, wiping away an imaginary speck of dust. She did it again and again. It was a reflex, a nervous tick. If she could just clean the railing, maybe the world would make sense again. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was thin and brittle. She did not look at me. She kept staring at the railing, rubbing the invisible spot. "Why didn't you stop? You won. You bought the company. You own it all. Why did you have to take the rest? Why did you have to take the house?" She finally looked up at me. Her eyes were hollow. "You have won, Maya," she whispered. "Isn't that enough?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had terrified me for half my life. I looked at the woman who had equated cleanliness with godliness and control with love. She thought this was a game. She thought this was about scoreboards and winners and losers. "This is not about winning or losing, Veronica," I said. I took a step closer to her. "This is the first time in 20 years that things are actually being cleaned properly," I said. "You cannot just wipe the surface and pretend the rot isn't underneath. You have to strip it all the way down. You have to remove everything that is contaminated." I looked at her hand, still hovering over the railing. "I am not punishing you," I said. "I am just doing what you taught me. I am doing a thorough job." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, her hand dropped to her side. She looked small. She looked old. Without another word, she turned and walked down the stairs, trailing after Alex, stepping into a future that belonged to no one but herself. 6 months later. The sun was streaming through the glass walls of the conference room at Everline Consumer Goods headquarters. It was a space of light and air, completely different from the dark, suffocating rooms of the old factory. I sat at the head of the table. To my right sat Gloria Ramos. She was no longer wearing her factory coveralls. She was wearing a sharp gray blazer. Her title on the placard in front of her read, Chief Operations Officer. We were looking at the first run of the new product line. The bottles were sleek, modern, and transparent. The old, dated Sterling logo was gone. In its place was a simple, elegant label. Heart and Home. It was a tribute. It was a memorial. It was a promise. Gloria picked up one of the brochures we had just printed for the internal launch. She smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling. "I never thought I would see the day," she said. "The workers are still in shock about the scholarship fund. I had 3 people come into my office yesterday crying. They said their kids can actually go to college now." "It is not charity," I said. "It is an investment. We invest in the people. They invest in the product. It is simple math." Gloria read the text on the back of the brochure out loud. It was the mission statement I had written myself late one night in my apartment. A home is not clean just because it shines. True cleanliness comes from the way we treat the people who live inside. A home is built on respect, on safety, and on the quiet dignity of care. She put the brochure down. "They are good words. Maya, your grandmother would be proud." "She would," I said. "But words are easy. The work is keeping them true." We spent the rest of the afternoon signing the new policy documents. We finalized the health insurance upgrades. We approved the education grants for the children of the employees. strictly for tuition and books. A pure, clean gift of opportunity, free from the strings and leverage that had defined my own upbringing. I left the office late that afternoon. I had one last stop to make. I drove out to North Lake Crest. The neighborhood was quiet. The lawns were manicured. The world here was still pretending to be perfect. I pulled into the driveway of the house. There were no cars in the garage. The windows were dark. A bank foreclosure sign had been pulled up from the lawn, leaving a small hole in the grass. I unlocked the front door. The key turned smoothly. The house was empty. The furniture was gone. The heavy drapes had been taken down, letting the late afternoon light flood into the rooms. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight. It was silent. I walked through the foyer, past the spot where Veronica used to check for muddy shoes. I walked through the dining room, past the place where the long mahogany table used to sit. The floor was bare. The ghost of the stain I had covered with my napkin was gone, sanded away or just vanished with the table. I walked into the kitchen. It was the heart of the house. It was the place where I had spent thousands of hours scrubbing, polishing, and fearing. It was the place where a mop handle had broken my spirit and a water spot had sealed my fate. It looked different now. It was just a room. The counters were dusty. The appliances were unplugged. The massive refrigerator stood open, dark and empty. There was a man standing by the window. He was a contractor I had hired. He was wearing work boots and holding a clipboard. He looked up as I entered. "Ms. Warren," he said, "we are ready to start the demolition on Monday. The crew is lined up." "Good," I said. "We have the plans for the remodel," he said, tapping his clipboard. "The conversion for the Hart House Center, 12 individual suites for the residents, counseling rooms downstairs, a communal living area. It is a good layout. It will be a safe place for these women to get back on their feet." He looked around the kitchen. "It is a lot of work," he admitted. "This place is, well, it has a weird vibe, heavy." "I know," I said. "We are going to gut most of it," he said. "But I wanted to ask, is there anything you want to save? Any of the fixtures? The cabinets? The light fittings? Some of this stuff is expensive custom work." I looked around. I looked at the expensive granite island where I used to eat my meals standing up. I looked at the custom cabinets Veronica had screamed about if a door was left slightly ajar. I looked at the floor tiles I had scrubbed with a toothbrush. I walked over to the patio doors. The glass was coated in a thin layer of dust. I could see my reflection in it, faint and ghostly. I saw the woman I had become. I saw the suit. I saw the straight spine. I saw the eyes that no longer looked down in fear. I reached out and touched the glass, right near the bottom hinge, the spot where the water stain had been 10 years ago. "No," I said. I turned to the contractor. "Keep the light," I said, gesturing to the sun streaming in through the glass. "Keep the windows so the sun can get in. But the rest of it?" I looked at the kitchen one last time. "Clean it again," I said. The contractor looked confused for a second, thinking I meant to scrub the counters. But then he saw the look in my face. He saw that I wasn't talking about dust. "Strip it down to the studs," I clarified. "Take it all out, every cabinet, every tile, every piece of molding. I want it gone. I want this room to be a blank slate. I want the people who come here to have a fresh start, a real one." "Understood," he said. "We will scrub it clean." "Yes," I said. "Clean?" I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I walked through the empty hallway, my heels clicking on the hardwood. The sound didn't echo with loneliness anymore. It sounded like potential. It sounded like space. I stepped out the front door and onto the porch. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. A temporary sign was hanging from the porch railing, fluttering slightly in the breeze. "Future site of the Hart House Center, a safe haven for recovery and new beginnings." I stopped on the walkway and looked back at the house. It was just wood and stone. It held no power over me. Veronica was gone. Alex was gone. The fear was gone. I felt a warmth on my shoulder, like a hand resting there. I knew, in that irrational, deeply human part of my heart, that Lydia was standing beside me. She wasn't saying anything. She didn't have to. She was just smiling. I had bought the table, I had bought the house, and now I was opening the doors to people who actually needed a seat. Legacy isn't about the name etched on a bottle of bleach or the brass plaque on a gate. Legacy isn't about bloodlines or DNA. Legacy is about who you choose to protect. It is about who you choose to let into your life and who you have the courage to remove. It is about having the strength to look at the things that seem untouchable, the powerful families, the ironclad traditions, the scars of the past, and realizing that they can all be dismantled if you have the right tools. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my feet. I didn't look back again. My stepmother had once forced me to clean until my hands were raw, demanding that I remove every invisible speck of dirt from her world. She wanted purity. She wanted perfection. In the end, I gave her exactly what she asked for. I became the ultimate cleaner. I used contracts instead of rags. I used the law instead of bleach. And I didn't just clean the window. I removed the entire house from her grip. And I did it without asking for permission, without saying sorry, and without leaving a single spot behind. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit the hype button so this story can reach more people.